In 1860, if you took the financial market value of every single railroad in the United States.
Right, all of them.
Yeah, all of them. And then you added that to the value of every single factory in the entire country, you still would not reach the total market value of enslaved human beings in America. I mean, think about that for a second.
Well, it completely shatters the way we usually picture the pre-Civil War economy.
Yeah,
You know,
absolutely.
we tend to visualize Southern agriculture on one side and Northern industrial progress on the other. But the sheer math reveals that the primary economic engine of the nation, the most valuable capitalized asset driving global trade, was human property.
It is wild. But anyway, welcome to our latest deep dive. We are so thrilled you're sitting down with us today. It's Thursday, July 2nd, 2026.
Which means we are exactly 2 days away from the 4th of July weekend.
Exactly. We're celebrating America's 250th birthday.
2.5 centuries. I mean, that is a monumental milestone.
It's a massive anniversary, and because of that, we are taking on a pretty massive mission today. We are looking at a stack of sources, historical data, sociological research, economic reports, all bundled under this one title, Slavery's Echoes, the Enduring Architecture of American Inequality.
Right.
So our mission for this deep dive is to understand how a 246-year institution running from 1619 to 1865 still shapes modern American economic and social structures for you today.
And, as we look at this stack of sources today, we need to be very, very clear up front. These texts touch on fiercely debated, politically charged topics, especially regarding present-day disparities in America.
Oh, yeah.
So our job here is not to tell you who is right. We are absolutely not taking a political side or, endorsing any specific viewpoint. We are simply here to impartially unpack the historical math, the economic data, and the scholarly arguments exactly as the researchers present them.
Right, just laying out the facts.
Exactly. Our goal is to just lay out the mechanisms they describe so that you can weigh the facts and the arguments for yourself.
Yeah. So we are the guides, the data is the map, and you are the one driving. And to understand the landscape we are driving through today, the sources argue that we have to start with the raw, unfiltered economics of the past.
Yeah, you have to follow the money.
Right. Because if capital is the foundation of the American economy, well, we have to look at how that capital was originally generated.
And when we dive into the financial metrics of the 1800s, I mean, the scale is staggering. By 1860, there were roughly 4 million enslaved people in the United States.
Wow.
And the labor of those 4 million people produced cotton that accounted for nearly 60% of all U.S. exports.
60%. I mean, that isn't just a sector of the economy.
No.
That is the bedrock of the national GDP.
Right.
And the wealth generated, it didn't just stay on southern plantations either.
Oh, not at all. That cotton-fed textile mills in New England.
Right.
It was insured by financial institutions in New York. The entire system was this highly integrated, incredibly lucrative national wealth-generating machine.
Okay, so then 1865 arrives, the 13th Amendment is ratified, and the legal institution of chattel slavery ends.
Yes.
But the immediate question becomes, what happens to the capital?
Well, the plantation owners retained their land titles. They kept their businesses, their banking relationships, and crucially, they kept the legal ability to pass that generational wealth down to their children.
While the emancipated people walked away from 246 years of uncompensated labor with zero property, zero savings, and zero financial restitution.
Nothing.
Okay, let's unpack this for a second. Because to make this make sense for us today, we really have to look at how compound interest and time actually work.
Yeah, that's a great point.
It's like, imagine playing a game of Monopoly, right? Where one family gets to play for 246 rounds. They are pass and go, they're collecting $200, buying up all the properties, building hotels, all before the second family is even allowed to roll the dice.
Right.
And then on round 247, the game master says, okay, the rules are equal now. Everyone plays by the same rules.
It doesn't matter.
Exactly. It doesn't matter that the rules are fair in round 2047 because the first family already owns the entire board.
What's fascinating here is how clearly the modern economic data reflects that exact analogy. If we look at the 2022 Survey of Consumer Finances, it's from the Federal Reserve, the median white household wealth in America is approximately $285,000.
Okay.
The median black household wealth is approximately $45,000.
Wow, that's a huge gap.
It is. Now, scholars across the spectrum fiercely debate exactly how much of that specific wealth gap is a direct result of slavery versus, say, later policies or other market factors.
Sure. Yeah.
But the mathematical reality of that initial 1865 head start in asset accumulation is undeniable. The compounding engine of wealth started for one group centuries before it legally could for the other.
But the disparity didn't just freeze in 1865 with the zero bank balance, right? Because systems of power, they rarely just say, oh, well, there goes our primary source of free labor. I guess we'll just pay fair market wages now.
Yeah, that's not how it works.
Right. If slavery was the economic engine of the South, what happened to the labor force the day after emancipation? The sources suggest the system simply adapted.
Yeah, and the adaptation was swift. It brings us directly to the text of the 13th Amendment itself.
Okay.
The amendment abolished slavery, sure, but it contained one very significant structural exception. It reads, quote, "except as a punishment for crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted."
See, I am struggling to understand the logistics here. If the 13th Amendment supposedly banned slavery, how did the federal government just, look the other way while states actively recreated a forced labor system?
Because the 13th Amendment had a built-in constitutional blind spot. It explicitly exempted criminals.
Oh, wow.
Right. Recognizing that loophole, Southern legislatures almost immediately enacted what were known as black codes.
Okay, I've heard of those.
Yeah, these were heavily targeted laws designed to criminalize incredibly mundane, everyday behaviors. We are talking about vagrancy laws, loitering, or, get this, simply being unemployed.
Wait, unemployed?
Yes. If you were newly freed, you obviously had no property. And if you couldn't prove on paper that you had a job by January 1st of a given year, you were breaking the law simply by existing in public.
So you were arrested for the crime of not having the job you were never given the opportunity to get in the first place?
Precisely the mechanism.
That's insane.
And the consequence of breaking those codes was arrest. Once you were classified as a criminal, the state could legally compel you to work. Thousands of newly freed Black Americans were arrested and then leased out by state governments to private corporations.
Leased out, like rented.
Yes, they were sent to coal mines, lumber camps, railroads, steel companies.
Wait, so state governments were essentially renting human beings out to private corporations for profit.
That's exactly what it was.
I mean, it sounds like the legal institution of chattel slavery simply hired a PR firm, rebranded itself through a constitutional loophole, and went right back to business.
Yeah, historian Douglas A. Blackmun literally terms this era slavery by another name. It preserved the economic output of uncompensated labor while shifting the legal framework.
Yeah.
You were no longer legally categorized as property. You were categorized as a criminal. And the economic incentives made the conditions incredibly brutal.
Because I saw in the sources the records from the Tennessee Coal, Iron, and Railroad Company in Alabama. They are horrifying.
Oh, they're grim.
They outline massive mortality rates, rampant disease, starvation, violence, and virtually zero medical care.
Well, think about the economics of it. Under chattel slavery, an enslaved person was viewed as a capital investment. If they died, the owner lost a massive financial asset.
Right.
Under convict leasing, the corporation had zero capital invested in the human being. If a leased prisoner died in a coal mine from starvation, the company simply went back to the state and leased another prisoner for a few dollars.
So they were entirely disposable.
Completely disposable labor force.
Wow. So, okay, we see how the wealth gap was established and how the labor force was controlled immediately after 1865. But controlling labor wasn't enough for these emerging systems, was it?
No, it wasn't.
Right, because if you can't control labor through overt laws anymore, you have to control geography. Once people were technically free but highly criminalized, the question became, where are they legally allowed to exist, and how does that geography dictate their economic future?
And this takes us into the 1930s and the creation of federal housing policies.
Okay.
The federal government, specifically an agency called the Homeowners Loan Corporation, or HOLC, began creating comprehensive neighborhood maps to assess mortgage risk.
This is the redlining, right?
Exactly. Appraisers literally drew red lines around predominantly Black neighborhoods, labeling them as hazardous or financially risky investments.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because this wasn't just some map sitting in a dusty filing cabinet. I mean, imagine playing a video game where, based purely on the coordinates of where your character spawns, the game permanently locks off the wealth-building skill tree.
Yeah.
That is essentially what redlining did in the real world.
The mechanism was devastatingly simple. The federal government signaled that it would not back loans in those redlined areas. Private banks terrified of the financial risk without federal backing, simply refused to issue mortgages to anyone living inside those red lines.
Just cut them off entirely.
Right. It was a federal stamp of disapproval that starved entire neighborhoods of capital overnight.
While white families were able to obtain federally backed, affordable mortgages, buy homes, and watch those homes appreciate in value over decades, black families were artificially locked out of the market and forced to remain renters.
Yep.
And as our sources point out, home equity is the single largest source of wealth for most American families. Even today, the homeownership rate for white households is about 74%, while for black households it sits around 46%.
And that geographic isolation, it doesn't just impact your bank account when you sell your house. It dictates the trajectory of the next generation immediately through the education system.
Right, because in the United States, public school funding relies heavily on local property taxes. It's like this domino effect built entirely on those 1930s maps.
Exactly.
If your grandparents' zip code was redlined by a federal map maker, they couldn't get a mortgage. They couldn't build home equity. Without home equity, there's no inherited wealth passed down to your parents.
And it compounds.
Yes. Because of property taxes, that exact same redline zip code naturally has artificially depressed property values, which means your local public school raises significantly less revenue than a school just a few miles away.
And this is why the 1954 Supreme Court decision in Brown v. Board of Education, which declared legally mandated school segregation unconstitutional, didn't fix the underlying disparity.
Right, because the map was already drawn.
Exactly. The architecture had already shifted from legal segregation to economic segregation. You don't need a law banning someone from a school if they are economically barred from buying a house in the zip code that funds the school. Economic segregation is much harder to strike down in a courtroom.
So, what does this all mean for us now? Because to play devil's advocate here, a lot of people looking at modern prison statistics or health disparities on the evening news today would say, hey, that is about individual choices in 2026, not laws from the 1930s. People need to take personal responsibility.
Sure, we hear that a lot.
Right. So how do these sources mathematically draw a straight line between a redlining map and, say, a maternal health outcome a century later? Are they arguing the system isn't broken, but rather functioning exactly as it was designed to?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the researchers are pointing to what they call a compounding series of social determinants.
Wait, let's pause there for a second. What exactly is a social determinant in this specific context?
So think of a social determinant as the invisible baggage of your zip code. It is the environmental and economic reality you are born into. Are there grocery stores with fresh food nearby, or just fast food and liquor stores? Is your neighborhood situated next to a highly polluting industrial zone? Is the local hospital understaffed? Health and justice disparities don't happen in a vacuum, They are the downstream realities of these determinants.
And the sources illustrate this perfectly with the criminal justice data. I mean, Black Americans make up roughly 13% of the U.S. population, but represent roughly 37% of the prison population.
Yeah, and to understand the mechanism behind that statistic, the sources point us to the sentencing laws of the 1980s and 1990s. Just look at the legal treatment of cocaine.
Right.
The law established penalties for crack cocaine, which was aggressively prosecuted in poorer, predominantly black communities, that were astronomically harsher than the penalties for powder cocaine, which was more commonly used in wealthier, predominantly white communities.
The disparity was a 100-to-1 ratio.
It's unbelievable.
You needed 100 times the amount of powder cocaine to trigger the same mandatory minimum sentence as a tiny amount of crack cocaine. And that legally stood until Congress finally passed the Fair Sentencing Act in 2010.
So it wasn't merely a question of who was committing crimes. It was a question of how the legal system selectively penalized the geography and the demographics of the offenders. The law targeted the environment. And we see this exact same compounding environmental effect in modern healthcare.
Yeah, the 2023 CDC data on maternal mortality in these sources is incredibly bleak.
It is.
The maternal mortality rate for Black women is 50.3 deaths per 100,000 births. For white women, it is 14.5.
And researchers trace those maternal mortality rates directly back to those social determinants we just defined. It is the result of living in neighborhoods starved of specialized medical care, the physical toll of chronic stress from economic instability, and documented systemic biases within the medical field where the crime levels of Black patients are frequently dismissed or undertreated.
Wow.
These outcomes are the modern echoes of those initial 1930s blueprints.
We've seen how legal definitions of forced labor morphed in America over centuries. But if we look at the global supply chains feeding our upcoming 4th of July celebrations, the sources reveal that forced labor didn't just morph domestically, it evolved globally.
Yes, it is.
The sources deliver a massive reality check here. Actual slavery didn't vanish from the earth in 1865.
Not at all. And the modern numbers are staggering. Data from the International Labor Organization and the human rights group Walk Free estimate that in 2021, 49.6 million people were living in conditions of modern slavery globally.
49.6 million people. That is more than 10 times the 4 million enslaved people in the United States back in 1860.
Yeah.
It is a staggering realization that as consumers in 2026, buying our smartphones and our clothes, we might still be unknowingly relying on a global shadow system of unfree labor.
Very well might be. But the sources are careful to distinguish this modern global system from the American historical model. Modern slavery is rarely the hereditary, racialized chattel slavery seen in U.S. history, where legal property status was passed from mother to child.
Okay, so how is it different?
Today, the mechanisms of control are typically tied to armed conflict, authoritarian governance, and severe debt manipulation.
How does that actually function on the ground today? Like, what do these modern mechanisms look like?
Well, we see state-imposed forced labor in authoritarian regimes like North Korea. We see mandatory, indefinite national service in Eritrea, which basically amounts to forced labor.
Oh, wow.
In Pakistan, a primary mechanism is debt bondage in agriculture and brick kilns. A family might take out a tiny, high-interest loan just to buy medicine.
Just for medicine?
Yeah, and the terms of that loan are designed so that it mathematically can never be repaid.
That's horrifying.
It traps the family and their children in generations of forced labor at the kiln. And in India, simply due to the sheer scale of the population and vast economic disparities, you see massive absolute numbers of people trapped in forced labor and human trafficking.
The dark irony here is profound. As America prepares to light fireworks and celebrate its 250th birthday of freedom, the global supply chain providing the very goods for that celebration is still heavily reliant on profound levels of human exploitation.
It's definitely something to think about.
It really forces you to look at the tags on your clothes and the batteries in your devices with a completely different level of scrutiny.
So to synthesize the overarching debate presented in all these sources, scholars will undoubtedly continue to argue over the exact percentages of modern disparity.
Sure.
They will debate how much of the $285,000 to $45,000 wealth gap belongs purely to the institution of 1619, how much belongs to the redlining maps of the 1930s, and how much belongs to the drug sentencing laws of the 1990s.
Right. The exact numbers will always be debated.
But there is a universal consensus across these texts that you simply cannot understand modern American social patterns, where people are allowed to live, where they go to school, who ends up in prison, and who survives childbirth, without understanding the foundational 246 years of slavery and the subsequent adaptive systems that immediately replaced it.
You've probably sat in a city council meeting or voted on a local property tax levy for your neighborhood schools and wondered why the debate is so incredibly heated. It can feel like total information overload.
Oh, yeah, it can be overwhelming.
But these sources argue that you're not just voting on a tax rate, you're voting on an invisible architecture. By understanding this historical through line, you are equipped to see the mechanisms behind the daily news rather than just reacting to the headlines.
Context is the antidote to confusion. When you take the time to learn exactly how the house was built, you stop wondering why the floorboards creak in that specific, predictable way.
I love that analogy. And I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over as you go about your day. It's a thought that builds on everything we've explored, but looks directly at the future. The sources made it incredibly clear that historical wealth was built and passed down through physical land, agricultural monopolies, and intense manual human labor.
Right.
But look at the world today. We are stepping into an era completely defined by artificial intelligence, digital assets, and virtual economies. An era where physical land and manual labor are no longer the ultimate, exclusive drivers of capital.
That's a huge shift.
So what happens to the trajectory of American inequality now? Will this new digital frontier finally break the 246-year-old echoes of the past? Or will the algorithms we are building right now simply encode those old 1930s neighborhood maps straight into the future?
An invisible architecture, built on lines of code instead of red ink.
Exactly. You can paint the house all you want, but you can't ignore the foundation. We want to warmly thank you for joining us on this deep dive today. Keep questioning the maps you are handed, and keep exploring the world around you.